if it's recording. Hi, Mikki.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing
So
well.
we're here today to chat about the Ironman World Championships that just happened in Kona, the men's World Championships. And Mikki and I were chatting offline about some of the things that we saw the pro men do in the race, and which it was a great race, first of all. And then my thinking as a coach is always about like what lessons can we learn from what we saw, and how do we as amateurs apply those like to ourselves, or how do we help our athletes apply those to their races too? um because it's not a matter of amateurs just do what the pros do, right? Like
Right,
like
right.
that's a recipe for disaster. So like there's a couple ways to watch that race. One is just like be purely entertained. And then the second one is like as we're watching to be like, oh, what can we learn from this?
Right.
So anyway,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah.
tell me about your experience watching it.
Well, so as we had chatted offline, I was in home chore mode. So I was not glued to the television all day long, but I had enough on to kind of go back and forth between my home chores and watching the race. Yeah, my takeaways again, I think fantastic race, really dynamic, especially on the run. And, that's not uncommon, I think, these days. But it sounded like very hot conditions for this race. Fast, the winds in Kona, I think, determine a lot of the race, especially bike speeds, as you well know. But the heat, the humidity, it's brutal, and so I think we saw a lot of that, on the run, and that's real, right? If you're a pro, if you're an age grouper, right there, if we don't have the fueling and our hydration, and we're maybe over biking or over running and we're overheating, it's very difficult to come back from that. So yeah, I think that affected several pros. I think I'll be interested to hear some of the folks that maybe didn't have the races they wanted, from, in their own words, how they are processing their race. Usually we see those uploaded a few days after, just to get a take on, how to go, what happened, decisions they made to pull out of the race or pull it back, what have you.
Yeah, I
So
remember saying the same thing after the race was over. I was like, I cannot wait to hear like everybody's rundown of how, like what their take on it. Because here's the thing, like we're sitting here, like we watch from the comforts of our own home, right? So it's like I'm not going to be the critic who's not in the arena, beating up on, these pros who grew up, because I wasn't there. I have been there, so I'm like, I know like how ugly it can get.
right,
It's super
right,
legit. But yeah, I can't wait to hear what their takeaways are. And then it's just a matter of like what I what I think our takeaways could be. So
right.
what I say, like, so I live here in Hawaii, and I know the conditions really, really well. There is a little part of me, and I guess I feel a little bit bad or guilty even saying this, but like when people come here and they blow up, there's a little part of me that's like relieved inside. And it's because like I blow up in training so frequently here. Like, like I go out on a 5 mile run and I come home and I'm like wringing out my socks and I'm wringing out my tank top. And it's like, I, every day I'm like, I wonder what it would be like to go for a run and not lose pounds in sweat. Like, what would that even be like? And so when people come here and these are the best athletes in the world, and when they start melting down, it's a little bit of validation for like me personally that like, oh, when we're melting down, guess what? It's human physiology. And I think that is like a really big point. So like if we just get started into what are the lessons that we learn from watching this race, and like one of mine is really like physiology is physiology. And so while like your mindset approach matters, while your fueling matter, like everything matters, but you can't fake the physiology on these things. And there was a quote, you and I have both been coached by Lucho, And I'm sure he has said this to you. And I mean, he hasn't coached me for well over a decade now. And there are a few things that he has said that still ring very true in my ears. That there were workouts that he would write where he would say, get to the point where you want to slow down, not when you have to slow down. Right.
Mhm.
And it's like, at first, I'm not sure I really understood what he was saying about that.
Mhm.
And now I have a much better understanding of thresholds, right? And like what a threshold is. And there is a point where you want to slow down and you're still capable of doing it. And then there's a point that's like a little teeny tiny bit above that where you have to slow down.
Yeah.
Right. And when we're in heat or humidity, because to be honest, it wasn't really that hot. It could have been, we've had Konas in the past that have been way hotter. The difference was though this year, because of the rain, there was like a storm that was off to the east that was coming in and it was cutting off the winds. So the
Mhm.
winds, when the winds are light, it's so humid and sticky and like the air is really heavy. And so when we think about likely what a physiology point for those guys that forced some of them to have to slow down, right? Like it wasn't a choice that they were making, like, oh, this is too hard. I don't want to do it anymore. It's like I physically don't have another choice. The only option right now is to walk or to slow way down. And it's because their body temperature goes up. If and when your body can't cool itself, that point is going to come a lot sooner.
Yeah.
And humidity out there was the part that was preventing like a human's body from cooling itself. And that's why, like, if you're watching, I was watching on the run, and those guys were taking those big 5-gallon jugs of cold water and just like dumping it all over their whole bodies and like looking for ice and trying to stick ice anywhere they could on their bodies. And it was because they were trying to find a way to cool themselves down, because when it's that humid, your body's just not going to cool itself. And so therefore, so if like, the whole point of this conversation is what lessons can we learn from that? I mean, the body temperature point is huge. Like you have to find a way to cool yourself. And part of what makes us get really hot is when we're overworking.
Yeah, exactly.
When we're
Yeah.
working like too close to our threshold for too long, the chances of us approaching and hitting that body temperature point that's too high will come a lot sooner. And once you get there, like there's no amount of gel that you can take. It's gonna fix
Nope.
that.
Yeah, no, it really is. And the techniques that we have, there's new tools, there's new hats, there's new, but it is very difficult, right, to bring that core body temperature down once it has reached, above its capacity to function, right? Or we're getting close to that capacity. And so the alternative is to be more conservative. And I think we've probably had conversations with our athletes who we know are going to be racing hot races, and my advice is always we have to be conservative. If we can be conservative and we play the game right, we race smart, we can watch people come back to us, right? And that's maybe not what happened in every situation, every pass that happened with the pros, but I mean, Patrick Langa had a phenomenal run. I mean, he's a phenomenal runner. But if we look at his race overall, well, he went out and he ran the race that he knew he was capable of, I think. But he might have been more conservative on the bike, and Cam Wurf as well. But those are details we can get into. But I completely agree with you. There are, we can work on bringing our body temperature down, but it's very difficult. The alternative is to have an approach that is a bit more conservative than we might want to race at, which is always, I get asked all the time, well, how can I race faster in the heat? How can I be faster in the heat? How can I accommodate the heat better? And I mean, we can do things, right? There's sauna work, there's going and training in heat. There's been some interesting studies about training at elevation and how there's a crossover between training at altitude and heat adaptations and vice versa. But ultimately, I'll be real honest, I am not a racer that can race well in the heat. I don't live in a hot climate. I don't like to train in a hot climate. So, I know that it's very difficult to get better at doing that. So I digress a little bit, but physiology, it matters. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the fitter you are, at
Yes.
least in theory, right? In theory, the fitter you are, the better, the closer you'll be able to get to racing your pace, your power in the heat. However, human physiology states that like everyone is going to go slower. It's just a matter of like how much slower are you going, right? Like so between 60 degrees with the not that much humidity or 85 degrees and lots of humidity, everyone is going slower. It's just a matter of how much slower. The fitter people will slow down less, and the people who pace themselves well will slow down less, but everybody slows down.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the amount of hydration you need here is just so much more than anywhere else. Well, actually, at elevation, you guys need,
Yeah.
I feel like at elevation and in heat, humidity.
Yeah, it's often not you don't feel, well, it depends. Sometimes you do feel like, oh yeah, I am very parched. Other times it's a weird you're like, I'm not thirsty, but all of a sudden you are peeing brown and you're like, wow, I'm really dehydrated. So yes, it does matter for some reason that sometimes you just don't get the cues at elevation that you should be getting, that you need to hydrate.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
what's
so
the other takeaway that you learned or what, what you saw in the race?
I will, being a coach that often, no, not often, I do have my athletes focus a lot on cycling. I'm a very cycling heavy coach. I think it translates well into overall fitness, and we sprinkle in run intensity sometimes it's aerobic running, math. But I was impressed with the cycling. I was very impressed with the biking, obviously. I mean, Sam Laidlow threw down a 3:57, correct?
7. I mean, the old record was like 4:04.
I mean, I mean, that's mind boggling to me. However, did that affect his run? And I will wait to see if he's going to give us a debrief on what he thinks. But I mean, from an outsider's perspective, I would say probably yes, in either one of two ways. Again, physiology. So potentially not enough fitness to overcome the conditions, and or biking at a level and not fueling adequately, so that then, when you saw him, I mean, his run slowed down. It wasn't like a huge, well, it was, I'll just be real. I mean, it was a blow up, right? But we saw him incrementally getting
It was an
slower.
explosion, Mikki. It was like a giant
I don't want
explosion.
to be, I mean, watching the splits, you're like, okay, slowing down. And yeah, there seemed to be mile 10, 11. There was the blow up. So, I can't know. We can't know really. Like, was that lack of, all of these athletes, incredibly fit. So my, thoughts go to, was it fueling then? Was he not adequately fueling for the effort he was putting out on the bike under the conditions? Because also the conditions affect how much we can absorb in hydration. And it's the fourth discipline.
Well, that part, and so like just to riff on that a little bit, that there's a couple things about Sam Laidlow's bike that when I was watching, like I'm looking for clues the whole time, right? And at one point early on, like in the first 40K, probably maybe 60K, he was out on the Queen K, and they had and he already had like a 2 or 3 minute lead on everyone, which, you're thinking, he said in the pre-race press conference that if he had 2 minutes on Christian Blumenfeld, that he felt pretty good, like he could win the race. And so I'm like, okay, well, how much BS was that? Because he had to have been getting splits all along. And if he had 2 minutes already so early into the race, you'd think he would just hold. And instead he continued to build, which in my mind is thinking, does he think he needs that much time on them? Because he didn't say that he did.
No.
But anyway, the whole point was watching this motorcycle next to him, and they had the camera on him direct from the side, and you could see his breath rate, because you could see his stomach like going in and out. And I didn't count, but Mikki, he had to have been taking like at least 40 breaths per minute, maybe 60. I mean, it was like you could see how hard he was breathing while he was working in that way. And I was like, it is so early to
Yeah.
be breathing like that, because what we know is that the way that we breathe is an indication of the physiology that's happening, underneath all of that. And so when you're breathing that fast, it is a sign that like your body is creating a lot of CO2, like you're using a lot of energy, you're using a lot of glucose.
Right.
And I'm thinking, oh, this is very expensive for him. And so I really thought maybe he would back off on that, because it's like in the beginning, you feel so good that you're capable of riding hard like that. But then, honestly, what we saw was when Christian Blumenfeld then, so now here's all these guys that, they want to win. They believe it's going to be a bike race. They don't believe they can get dropped on the bike, so they have to give it all on the bike. And you saw KB gave a giant effort, and which would be really tricky to pass, right? I mean, with the drafting rules and the way it is, and they're all spread out exactly 12 meters, like that is a tricky, sticky situation to pass that many people. And I don't know if you actually saw that part on the coverage. Like I was riding my trainer, so I watched it all, and I was like, first of all, I'm glad nobody got a penalty through that, because it feels like unfair to me
Right.
to, like, when clearly they're trying to get
Right.
through. But he gave a giant effort, and like what some of the commentators were saying was, 15-20 minutes of likely watts way above threshold, right? In the first couple hours of the race, when he's still physically capable of doing it. But what was the price of that? And so you can look at those early efforts and say that is very expensive in terms of energy and physiology. And then later, I mean, not too much later, did you see him puking? Like, did you
Oh
see
yeah.
all the footage? I was like, oh, that is really bad. KB's race is over. I was actually really surprised that he even made it into T2 with those guys. Like, he clearly backed off on the bike and then just sort of rode with the pack and made it in with him. And I thought, oh, maybe KB, maybe he'll come back on the run. And I really like him. Like, I would have loved to have seen that.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't, like, that wasn't a choice on KB's part,
No.
right?
Right.
Like, he didn't give up because he just didn't feel like wanting to work hard anymore. Like, that was, it was soul crushing, I'm sure, to not be able to run. But it's like, when we talk about how much energy does it cost to ride that hard, he was trying clearly to take it all in. And there's got to be something. Miranda Carfrey was saying this in the commentary that, once you go above threshold, your stomach's
Mhm.
going to shut down, and now you're not absorbing your, like, what you're taking in. So he's really pushing the boundary on how much carbohydrate you can take in per hour. Who knows how much he was taking, but probably like 120 to 150 grams per hour is what he was trying to get in. And I, that's tested. He's done that in training so much that he's confident he can do it. I'm sure he can, but not when you're pushing over threshold in
Right.
those conditions for that long. And then
Right.
his body was like, absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So like if you're thinking like, did Sam Laidlow eat enough? My question is like, if Sam Laidlow would have eaten more, would he have thrown it all up like KB did?
True. It's a good point. I mean, yeah, and it's very difficult. I mean, we can train, we can do this in training, we can practice, right? But it's very difficult still, because in race conditions at higher intensities, and hopefully I'm sure they are doing some higher intensity work, but again, not maybe at this level, right? I think it's still a notch above maybe what they are, if they are getting wrapped up in the race dynamics. And I think that also is something to touch on, because not all of our age groupers can stick to their race plan. And I think Magnus Ditlev said this at his post-race interview, which is like, I mean, it became and it's not just the people that were riding in these front packs, but it's like, it was a bike race. The bikes are fast, the cyclists are fast, and they were getting caught up in it. And he said, in his, post-race interview, which is that, yeah, it affected his run. It probably affected many people's run to bike that hard. And I think that's a real key takeaway for age group athletes. I mean, we have these sometimes power numbers or times, or, but the times are all dependent on the race conditions, and the race conditions change. Power is very idealized, right? Again, power is, if the race conditions are hot, it's windy, lots of things can happen. I mean, are we paying attention to our breathing? Are we paying attention to heart rate, our perceived effort? And so I think, over biking, right, is I think influenced some people's races for sure.
Yeah,
And
100%.
again, yeah,
Gustav called that too before the race. He was like, so I actually thought Gustav was going to do a lot better than he did, because I thought Gustav's really smart. He's really patient. He's not actually trying to win this race, but he's curious about how how far up in the field, like how much Pac-Man can he play,
right.
if he doesn't overbike and everybody else overbikes. And so I really thought he was going to do um, really well. And I'm super bummed for him that he didn't, because again, an athlete that I'm a huge fan of, Gustav Eden. Um,
Yeah.
but he was exactly right in that, like, a lot of guys are going to overbike, a lot of them are going to blow up. And then what you get is like Cam Wurf essentially executed Gustav Eden's plan.
Yeah, he did. I was
Right.
very impressed. And, I was trying to catch his post-race interview as well. At one point in the race coverage, and I did hear someone, they caught him on moving up the pack on the run, moving up the field. And they said, oh, his bike legs didn't show up. And I said, when that race commentator said that, I actually said, you know what? I think that was execute. Like, I don't know. I can't put myself in
He
his
still
brain.
biked like 403, I
I mean,
think,
he still bikes
faster
fantastic.
than his old record. And so you're like, I mean, the
Okay,
only
right,
reason we say his bike legs didn't show up is because Sam Laidlow went off the rails and rode 357.
right, right. So I would say, if anything, Cam raced his race, which he has in the past maybe not been as confident to do. Which brings me to another point about age and wisdom and all that good stuff for our masters athletes, or even any athlete, right? Having the experience, I think, does matter. In trying to be confident in that in your race. But yeah, I think number one for my takeaway on the bike was impressive, potentially damaging, and a real learning point for athletes, age group athletes, to not get tied up, right? And it's tough to do, right? When you're in the mid pack of, which I was always in the mid pack of Ironman racing, and it's really challenging. We talk about the challenges of trying to get around the pros when you're trying to make a pass. It's, if not even more challenging, especially if you're a strong female cyclist trying to get around a bunch of guys that don't want to be passed. We don't want to get into that, but it's a reality for sure. So
It's interesting too, is if we bring the mindset, pre-race mindset into this a little bit, and we got a really good, did you watch the post-race press conference when the top five guys were all seated in their chairs, like on Saturday afternoon?
I
It was
did
a
not.
separate YouTube video.
Oh,
Um, it's worth watching, because so what you have is five guys who are like freshly finished the race, and then they went up and they do their drug testing and they come back down, and um, they're pretty raw at that time, because they haven't even had 24 hours to like process it in their head or like come up with a story about how it went down. It's just like, it's very raw conversation. And Magnus and Patrick had a little debate like on that stage, talking about like bike tactics, because so essentially what we saw, I mean, if we're going to break this down in a nutshell and just be honest about it, it's like Sam Laidlow, who just threw it down on the bike and went clearly way too hard. If if he blew up the way that he blew up on the run, he clearly got caught up in the moment or something. Like, I don't know exactly what happened, but he clearly felt amazing. He's like, let's just go with it and see what happens. And look, last year in Nice, like, that worked out for him.
right.
Magnus had a memory of last year in Nice, Sam riding off the rails. And like, even in his pre-race interview, Magnus said he thought he was riding really good power in Nice last year. And Sam was riding away from him and then held on for the run and won. Magnus is saying, I wanted to win this race. And so I came in to win the race. And when I heard the splits to Sam, like, he believed that Sam was riding really strong because he had a memory from last year of Sam doing that same thing and being able to hold on to it. So from Magnus's perspective, he had to override, like, he knew he was overriding, and he
Yeah.
felt like he had to do it because Sam did it last year and he couldn't let Sam do that again. And Magnus was like, or sorry, Patrick had a very different perspective on that whole thing. He said, yeah, he goes, but if Sam was 5 minutes up the road, he goes, and actually Rudy chimed
Yeah.
in and was on Patrick's side on this, where he said, I was able to look down and see how fast we were going. We were flying. We were covering 46 kilometers in an hour. He's like, we were flying. So if Sam is going faster than us right now, he's going to blow, right? So both Patrick and Rudy thought Sam is going way too hard and he's going to blow. I'm confident in what I'm doing, so I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And Magnus wasn't looking at that metric of like his own speed. He was only looking at the deficit to Sam. So they had a really interesting exchange on that. And if I think about like, okay, what is our takeaway then of that is like basing your race performance in the middle of the race based on what somebody else is doing is a giant mistake.
It is. Yeah, it absolutely is. And again, I think so. Race your own race. It's always you against you. I mean, yes, there are race tactics and there are maybe some deficits you don't want to allow to happen, right? Or overcome, whatever. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, you've got to race your own race. You've got to be confident, not only in yourself, but yeah, I mean, maybe this goes back to my comment about like age and wisdom, right? Magnus, I think, is 26, 27. Patrick Longa is late 30s. I don't know his age off the top of my
38 or
head.
39. Yeah.
And I don't remember how old Rudy is, but two athletes that obviously, have a lot of experience. And so again, showing wisdom, being confident in what they're capable of, and yeah, maybe having some predictions or some thoughts again about, well, if we're going this fast, yeah, then Sam Laidlow is just absolutely, he can't hold that through the run. So
Yeah.
it paid off for that. Yeah.
You see the photo that Patrick Lang posted on Sunday morning? So
Uh,
I'm starting to love this trend, by the way. So like I think Christian Blumenfeld started it in 2021, like after he won St. George, where like on the next morning he posts a picture of himself and he's kind of like shirtless in bed, like with a glass of champagne and wearing
yeah.
his medal and his hakules and like all of it just like basking in this glory of being world champion. And it was just A+ level trolling. And for like the triathlon fan, incredibly entertaining. Like I just like love those photos. And then the next year when Gustav won, he posted a similar kind of thing. Chelsea Sodaro did something similar after she won. And so I was curious if Patrick would do that, right? Because his personality is a little different than theirs. But he clearly has a whole team around him, because I actually saw a video as well of how they did it. Like I don't know if they went down into the energy lab. They made it look like a main road, but it clearly wasn't a main road, where they took over the whole road and had like, Patrick sort of sitting there with his bike, and he's, wearing all of his winter's gear, but he had the Hakule on and he's playing a game of chess in this
Oh,
photo.
I
And I was
definitely.
like, A+. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, within an hour of posting it, there's 75,000 likes on it, right? Like, it's like one of those viral photos that I'm like, that's what Patrick did. Where if you think about even from before the race, the people that were loudest before the race, and this is a whole nother point that it's like, I see both sides of this. So if you look at like a Lionel Sanders, who like putting out media every single day, and like KB and Gustav are, featuring in those videos, and like just Daniel Beckegaard, people who were posting a lot about themselves before the race. As a triathlon fan, I love that. Like I absolutely love it. I eat it up. Like I really appreciate that they do it. And it makes me so sad when they don't perform well, and you look and see that like when you can zoom out after the race and be like, you know what? The ones that were quieter before performed better on the day.
Yeah.
Like they're just saving their energy all week, and they're like, I'm not going to do all this media stuff. Like it is a lot. It consumes energy to do that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And that to perform at a peak level, to perform your best, you need all of your energy. And so spending a bunch of your energy, race week, worried about like how many likes did that, how many views did my YouTube thing get, or right? Like when our mind is obsessed with that, we're using precious energy that we shouldn't be using. And I just feel like Patrick did a couple of pre-race interviews, but no, I mean, just kind of the minimum, right? He didn't go over and above and do a lot. If you look at like the most of the top 10, like they were pretty quiet pre-race.
Yeah.
I think that unfortunately there's a lesson there because like as the
Um,
fan, I love the loudness pre-race. And then like as the athlete, you're like, and if you want to perform, don't spend your energy like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've talked about this in other discussions around the quiet confidence that some people have, and I think that comes out with different types of athletes. I think Daniela Reef had a very quiet confidence. I think it goes maybe even deep. I completely agree. And I always tell my athletes pre-race, like if they need to use me as an excuse that, oh, my coach said I can't do that pre-race dinner, I'm fine. Tell them you got a call with me. We don't, whatever you need to do. Because I mean, the whole athletes exist on a spectrum, just like normal people in terms of introvert to extrovert. Some extroverts, it might not take as much energy to produce some of those films and social media. For some athletes that are more introverted, it does take a lot of energy. So I can identify with the introverted, it takes a lot of energy to show up and do interviews and social media. And that was never my thing. I just want to check out and be in my quiet little cave. And I think, yeah, that show that the pros also have that diversity. But to your point, if pros feel like they have to, and they are more introverted, that's unfortunate because, they really should, we should allow them, right? And their sponsors and everyone should be encouraging them to do what they need to have their best races. And I know that's been discussed in other forums about just the amount of obligations a lot of pros have before their races. And yeah, for my own, never raced pro, never would, because well, I didn't have the genetic capability.
Yeah. Like,
Honest,
let me name all the reasons why I never raced as a pro.
Right.
Number one.
Yeah. But I agree. I agree. And yeah, you're right. The top, 5, 10, they were not mentioned as like the favorites. So goes to show, you never know what's going to happen on race day. It's so easy to get mixed up, and I'm sure they're probably hearing it too, right? Like who's the favorite, and Christian and, Sam. And so.
Well, as a fan, so I mean, because there's several pieces to this, right? As a fan, I enjoy cheering for athletes who I feel like I know. Right?
Absolutely.
And so like I don't know Lionel Sanders, but guess what? I've been following that guy for 10 or 12 years, however long he's been around. And he wears his heart on his sleeve. And whether things go right or not, I just feel like he's really honest. I mean, he's clearly all over the place at times. And but like I like him so much and I cheer for him because he puts himself out there. And so there is a part of me that's like, well, guess what? Being a professional triathlete, you are a brand. And so it is your job to, put yourself out there, and like that's how you're going to get fans. You can win races, but if people don't like you, they're not likely to cheer for you. And so allowing people to know you allows people to like you. And so
Absolutely.
like I just feel like that balance is a really tricky one.
Absolutely. Yeah. For sure.
Right.
I mean, and I think, and they've done a lot for the sport. I think I started the sport 2012, 2011, 2012, and you knew the pros, right? But that was sort of the beginning stages of, I mean, I started following Lionel when he was doing blogging, right? So back in the day. And I think it really has brought the fans and it's helped build the community. And for that, I'm really grateful. And I'm the same way. I'm a huge Lionel fangirl, and think he's great. And it always breaks my heart when he doesn't have the race that, I know he wants and he's trained for. So I totally understand that.
Yeah. Talbot
Well,
actually posted something that I thought was interesting. He said, because there's a lot of questions about like now we have like these video logs pretty much daily for like a month leading into the race. And then like since the race, it's just crickets. And Lionel didn't have a good race. So it's really easy to assume that like, oh, Lionel's down in the dumps and he doesn't want to talk. And so like that's why there's not a video. And Talbot actually posted that we have it all done. Like I just haven't edited it yet because I've been on this island for a month with my wife and my son, and I've ignored her for the last month. And if I want to stay married, like I need to spend a day with my wife, totally fair. And so he's like, the video will get uploaded. Like Lionel's in good spirits. He, which I also found interesting that he, if Lionel is in good spirits, like after that performance, it it leads you to believe that there has been a really giant shift
Mhm.
in his expectations, or like in I don't know what exact, I mean, you probably know what I mean. That,
Yeah.
like, because before it was like, and I guess this is another one of my like key points, like what can athletes learn from this race, is along the lines of how we feel about our performance after is largely related to what were our expectations going in.
Mhm.
And so if your expectation going in is that I can and should win this race, and if I can do everything, or even if it's like your age group, like I can and should qualify for Kona, I can and should be on the podium here. And so you're going to approach the race differently with a different mindset than if you're like, I'm going to do my best the whole time. I'm going to make sure I'm pacing right. I'm going to make sure I'm feeling right. I'm going to make sure I stay within myself. Like if you're like, and so this is the process focused versus outcome focused. And when
Right.
you have these outcome goals and you don't achieve the outcome goal, you tend to be very disappointed in your race performance, versus when you have a process goal and you say, this is my process, this is how I want to be talking to myself on the swim. This is how I want to execute T1. Here's what I'm going to put in my special needs bottles on the bike. Here's the power that I'm going to push, or the heart rate I'm going to stick to. I'm not going above that cap. I'm going to keep my cadence up like this. I'm going to breathe calmly. I'm going to talk to my, like all those things. Then it's like when you do that, the result takes care of itself, and it is what it is. And you
Yeah.
can't control what anybody else did. And so if you want to be happy with your race after the fact, then executing your process and like letting the results take care of themselves, that's the way to be happy after a race. And it sounds like Lionel did that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think to add just slightly, I think sometimes this process oriented focus gets a bad rap because it's like, well, it's not competitive enough. It's like, no, no, no. These athletes that embrace this believe they are capable of winning, but that is not the focus, right? Like you have to believe that you're capable of meeting whatever expectation you have. However, there are the things you need to do to make that even a possibility, right, is much more in your control than you might think it is, right? You can't control what the other races are doing, but you can control, like you just said, everything about how you are executing your own race. And so from that perspective, it's highly competitive. I mean, when you think about, being in the moment, the presence, the flow, like that's all within your control, whether you're in first or whether you're in 50th, right? Like, so I agree. And I think it's good that Lionel, you have seen this. I didn't see Talbot's post on that, but that he is in a good headspace, and again, showing some wisdom from experience of your, of life and his career in sport. So that's good to
yeah.
hear.
I
Yeah.
mean, clearly, like Patrick, what I saw of Patrick's race was that Patrick had a process. Patrick knew what he wanted to do. I think for Patrick, he knew it was really important to get out of the swim with the top guys, right? Because it's like your racing Kona is really, really hard if you're not in the front swim pack.
Yeah.
Because those front swimmers are also capable of riding well. And so it's like he was executing his process right from the beginning, in swimming as well as he did. He came out of the water fourth. And you're like,
Yeah.
so he just put himself right in there. And then it's like he's just gonna mix it up with that front group. And he said when he did start dropping off from that big pack toward the end or in the back half. And he said that he was choosing to let them go because the the accordion style of like trying to not be in the draft zone. He's like, there were times he had to put on his brakes going uphill so that
Yeah.
he wouldn't like end up in the draft zone. And he's like, and then I found if I just dropped like 40 meters back, I could just do my own and just keep them in sight. And just that way I could press my own power and not have these like spike, slow down. That, I mean, so if we're talking about physiology, spike, slow,
Yeah.
spike, slow down, spike, slow down is the most expensive way to move forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah, hit it spot on there. So so you said process, a key takeaway, which I know we probably coach on that a lot. Stick to your own race, pay attention to your physiology, the conditions, and how you are responding to the conditions. Not over biking. What else? What else did you? We've got experience in there. What else? What were your other takeaways?
So I just have one more. We hit on most of them that I had. The one that, and you know that this is going to be key in my mind because of like, so we all see things through the lens that we are like currently looking at things, right?
Right.
So I've been obviously super into trying to understand how to move more efficiently. And I'm obsessed with watching people move now, like
I was
with
going to ask you about this.
swim,
Yeah.
bike, or run, right? Like just watching your body position, watching how relaxed you are, watching how easy it looks, for you to move. And so it's like I watched Patrick Lang run and I was just like, oh my God, it's beautiful. It's
Beautiful.
what he had going for him that pretty much nobody else there did is that he's got this rhythm and balance. So I mean, I was watching him run, it was like his chest is up, he's completely stacked with his posture. He had a high turnover, but it wasn't because he was picking his feet up faster. It was just because he was so balanced that it was really easy for him to find and keep this rhythm. And it was so like while I'm sure he was working very hard. So like I don't want to say like it was easy for him. But I guarantee you that those other pros out there were working just as hard, if not harder, to be moving slower. And it's because they weren't moving as efficiently as Patrick Lango was moving.
Yeah.
And so you're like, if there's a lesson to be learned there, it's like, it's possible to improve the way we move. It literally drives me crazy so we didn't get to see it in this race because like Lionel Sanders was never really like on camera at all. That in other races, when he's in the mix and the commentators will watch him run and be like, yep, that's just how he runs. He just has that like little glitch or and like the thing is, when we've solved a problem for ourselves, we start that like it becomes very easy to see that problem in someone else.
Mhm.
I used to run in a way that was so locked up, like my hips were locked up, my shoulders are locked up. I mean, I ran like a robot. Like I literally didn't move. I didn't rotate. I didn't. And and then through a long process of learning to let go of tension, learning to stack my joints, learning to move like with more ease and flow, like a lot of that has like I've really loosened up. I'm like, I feel really good moving now. And then I look at an athlete like Lionel Sanders and I'm like, his hips are so locked up when he runs.
Mhm.
Like like what's interesting is his upper body is actually moving. His upper body is doing what it seems like it should do, but not as much as it could be doing it because his hips are just completely locked up. And it is impeding and restricting the way he's capable of moving. And so when people say like, oh, Lionel's not like he'll never run under 240. Jack Kelly said that on like a podcast, like, Lionel will never run under 240 in a marathon. And part of me says, yeah, well, he could if he allowed himself to let go of tension and loosen up and run more efficiently. Like, because he's clearly got the physiology for it, he's got the mindset for it. It's not like he's out there not trying. He's trying as hard as he can, and his body's so locked up that he's not moving efficiently.
Mhm.
And versus like you get a Patrick who is moving efficiently, and boy, what a difference that makes. They also said, and I heard this again on that Jack Kelly podcast, that he saw some of like Patrick Langa's CDA numbers like from a wind tunnel. And so, like I don't know what all those are. I'm not professional in wind tunnels. But essentially he said that one of the things that makes for a better CDA on the bike is your actual body and the way that it moves. Right. So
Mhm.
like you can try to maximize all these things on your bike and have the fairings and have the cockpit and have the aero brakes and blah blah blah. But the biggest input into whether or not you're aerodynamic on your bike is the way you're holding your body. And so people who are stiff and locked up
Yeah.
are like it's hard to put yourself in a slippery position because your body's not moving a lot. You're like a big block, right? Like moving versus when you can be like really relaxed, letting go of tension, you can put yourself in this really nice, comfortable, easy position on the bike that you can hold. Like it didn't surprise me when I heard that Patrick Langa has some of the best CDA numbers in the game that I'm like,
Mhm.
well, that guy moves well,
Yeah,
right?
he
If
does.
you move well, you're going to swim well, you're going to run well, you're going to be good on the bike, and it's going to cost you less energy to do it.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I just feel like I saw a lot. I mean, and what you saw too from when Sam Laidlow was starting to melt down, right? And there's a photograph out there of Sam Laidlow running and Patrick Lange behind him. And so
Mm.
you can see like a frontal view of the two of them. And Sam Laidlow's body posture, all of it is very dejected, right? Like, so I mean, that guy, he hasn't had energy for a long, he's been running on fumes for the last hour at least. He knows he's about to lose his lead, which is like mentally and emotionally devastating, right? Like I mean, you come off the bike with like an 8 or 9 minute lead,
Oh yeah. I mean,
and then to blow that is like, I mean, just for your ego, for all of it, like that's hard to do. And so he physically looked dejected, right? His head was down, his chest was kind of caved in, his shoulders were drooping, right? And like from that position, it's really hard to run well versus you've got Patrick Lange behind him who runs better anyway, right? But also is in a better mental state of like he's happy, he's proud, he's feeling good. His posture is reflecting that, and when his posture is reflecting that, then he's going to run better. And so there's been this thing that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen it too, with like athletes that I've worked with where I've been like, they're really happy. Like just
mm,
like they're really happy. They're in a good place in their life. They're happy with their spouse. They're happy with their team around them. They're happy with their friends. They're happy with their job. They're happy with their training. They're happy with themselves. And they go out and they race better than I would have expected them to race. And I'm thinking, why is that? I'm thinking, well, you know what? It's because when we're happy, we carry ourselves in a different way.
yeah.
We're right, like your posture's better, you're more relaxed, you're moving with less restriction, and then you get more out of the bucket of energy that you have. Right. So if we
Absolutely.
look at it and say, like, I have a bucket of energy, how am I going to spend it? Am I going to spend it on pre-race YouTube videos? Well, that's your choice, right? Am I going to spend it on being really anxious and nervous about like, how am I going to do today? Am I going to spend it all in the first 2 hours of the bike because I'm not confident in my ability to run, so I need to make myself a giant gap here, give myself some buffer. Like, is that how I'm going to spend it? Or am I going to spend it just going through my whole process, and happily moving along and letting the results take care of themselves? And I'm like, that's what Patrick did, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was master class.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, I mean, how our mindset in some ways is more important. I mean, I'm not going to say it's more important than physiology because
Yeah, we literally started with like
right,
physiology. When it's hot and you're going for over
right,
7 hours,
right.
physiology, like, so that's what I would say is that I think mindset can play a role. If you're going 5 hours or less, what your mind, like, you can overcome some physiology,
Right. Absolutely.
right? Deficits, call it that deficit. You can overcome that. But when you're going 6, 7, 8 hours, like, there's no physiology is the key.
But a negative, being in a negative headspace or being in that, um, yeah, the dejected, space, it is, it's a double whammy, right? I've seen that in my athletes as well. Both ways, right? Someone that's very well trained, we know what they're capable of, and the mindset just tanked, right? They have certain thought patterns, they have certain stories they tell themselves, and when things get hard, and they always get hard in Ironman, no matter how fit you are, they should be hard. I mean, that's the whole point. We
Yeah.
want to race to our potential, and when we are doing that, it gets hard. You just go faster. But if we are in a headspace of I'm not, whatever the story is, right? That's when we slow down, we get down. I completely agree. Um,
I
and
think
this
that's
is,
where expectations come in too, right? Because like if I'm like, I expect myself to be ahead of that person. So like, I mean,
yeah,
the pros will do it the same way the age groupers will. It's just on a different level. So, Magnus is thinking, I have to be within 2 minutes of Sam, and Sam is riding away from me. So I have to go harder. And like age groupers will do the same thing. If we have a friend in the race and we're like, but I'm faster than her, like I should be ahead of her on the bike. Like, why is she ahead of me? So like, therefore I need to push harder. Or you start thinking to yourself, like, actually suck at this. I'm not as good as I thought. And like, as soon as those stories start going through your head, the negativity, the
Right.
negative spiral that happens from there is so real. Cause like maybe you start making bad decisions about how you're fueling and hydrating or not, right? Cause like I can't take time to sit up and drink right now because I have to make up time. Well, that was a mistake, right? It's like, no, I'm not feeling myself well. Or yeah, like just
Yeah.
the, the cortisol that, well, you know, I mean, the stress hormones that happen, all of that, the posture that goes, the tightening up, like, it's because as soon as we get mad at ourselves, the first thing we do is start breathing poorly.
Yeah.
And like, and from there, all sorts of stuff goes wrong. So
Absolutely.
I think that like keeping that, so finding a way to like let other people do what they're doing and focus on what you're doing and not compare during the race. Or like there was a thing that I used to do too when I was racing, and it's something that I've counseled athletes on, and it's mostly because like I learned this lesson myself, was that judging my performance while I'm still out there is always a mistake,
Bad.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's like there's times where they're like, when you're in it, and I don't write this to everybody because not everybody has my problem. Like some people won't judge themselves in the middle of the race. Like I would judge myself, you know, like by mile 3 on the run. I'm already judging. I'm already deciding what I'm going to do differently in training, what you know, how I'm going to fire my coach or like whatever,
What
right?
next race you're gonna reprove, right? Like,
Yeah, right, like all those things. And like the reality is if you can stay in the moment and just keep doing your thing, save the judgment for after,
yeah.
right? So like if we're going to judge the race and look back and say like what we could have done better, how we can improve, like all of that after is fine. But during the race, stay in the moment and just keep doing the very best you can in that moment. And you may finish the race and be like, actually, that wasn't as bad as I thought. I mean, it's so common to finish a race and then you start talking to all your friends after, and like, guess what? All those horrifically hard moments that you had, they all had them too.
Everyone
Right?
has them.
So then it's like everybody died on that hill. Everybody was overheating there. Everybody is, how did you handle that hardship? Right? And did you handle it by judging yourself and getting pissed off and starting to walk and giving up? Or did you handle it by stepping up and being like, this is hard right now. What can I do to help myself? Can I move more efficiently? You know, can I put my chest up? Can I drink more water? Can I put ice down? Anyway, like any of the things that you can do. And then at the end, you say, actually, that wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Yep.
Like there's that. I look at a Matthew Marquardt, but I don't know how to say his last
Yeah.
name. I've become a fan of that guy.
He's he's great. Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that from the peanut gallery, right? Like from our position, we could look at his race and be like, oh, maybe that was kind of disappointing for him, right? Because like he came out of the water in the front pack, he's riding in the front pack, he's driving the front pack a lot. He probably had really high expectations of himself. He ended up running like 301 or 302 or something like that, and coming in 15th.
Mhm.
And so you could be like, that could be like mentally and emotionally challenging for him because he basically spent the whole marathon getting passed. And like
Mhm.
that's not really a fun way to finish an Ironman. And his post afterward was like looking at all the bright spots. So instead of focusing on the fact that he just got passed and passed and passed and passed and dropped out of the top 5 and into 15th on the run, he's like, I went 7:58 in Kona.
Yeah. It was his first Kona. Yeah.
Well, his first he won the
Right.
age group race a
Yep.
couple years ago, but his first pro Kona. I went 7:58 in Kona. I'm top 15 in the world. I swam and biked with the front pack. I did, you know, I mean, he named off like all of these positive things from his race experience that he will like take with him, and building off that, like from that positive energy, is he's more likely to make smart decisions than if he's like, oh, I suck at the marathon and I didn't do that well and blah blah, blah, right? And focusing on all those negative things. And my thought of like when I saw that post of his, I was like, and you're gaining lots of fans.
Yeah. I guess my take, in terms of positive, negative, I'll be real honest, like my headspace is not always in the positive. but it's neutral. And I think what allows me to stay neutral is to have perspective. And I think that's what Matthew has.
Yeah.
He not only, I mean, as people are listening, maybe if you're listening, he's in med school, he's working to understand cancers, throat and neck cancers. I feel pretty strongly at this point that having other experiences, whether it doesn't need to be professional necessarily, but having the ability to have that kind of perspective, I think allows him to identify, what it is that went well. And he probably learned a ton about what he can do better for the next time. Class act. I think the guy's great. Really, I love the post, and I agree. But yeah, kind of coming back to like staying in the positive headspace, which from my own racing experience, I was never a mantra person. I was never like a super cheery, but I was non-judgmental. And I think that is something, I don't know why. I think it's been just my own weird brain way. I'm always looking at how to be better in the moment. And I don't, and not every, I probably did learn this at some point, right? Maybe as a high school or maybe as a soccer athlete, maybe it's being a scientist, but so for my athletes that struggle with staying positive, some athletes have it easier than others. I think there's just, again, differences in our brain chemistries, but the ability to stay in the moment, stay present, focus on what can you improve how are you moving? How are you fueling? How are you, for me being very, not to be woo, but I'm very in touch with natural world. So I look around, what's the beautiful, I mean, God, you're in Hawaii, you're on the Big Island, a geologic phenomena, amazing place, a lot of history. So, you can always find something to appreciate in the moment, even if you are in the pain cave or not having the race you wanted or anything, that nothing's going as planned. Well, what can we do to improve what we're experiencing right now, so but yeah, I agree. I think I'm glad to hear that some of the athletes that maybe we were expecting to see up front or higher or whatever, given how they were riding, they have taken away some real positives. And I think that's huge. And I think that's something that age groupers for sure can also learn from. I think that's, we want to learn from where things may have gone off the rails. That's why also I always tell my athletes to wait on a race debrief, right? Give it, because initially, as you were saying, when they did the post-race interview, all these emotions, that what we're hearing is emotion. We are not hearing the objective, sort of rational, logical, this is how it went down, because that doesn't come into our brain space until, for some people, 2 to 3 days, some people 2 to 3 weeks. Like, we need some space from it, depending on how it went one way or another. So I think, trying to take that time for ourselves, and then, looking at what we can do better to improve, but then what did go well in the post race. And yeah, staying non-judgmental during the race is absolutely key.
Yeah, those are the post-race reflection questions. I'd be curious, like what your format is on this. Like, my post-race reflection questions that I give to my athletes is like, number one, and I like them to write it all out, which not everybody likes to write it all out. Some people just want to talk, but I think there's power in actually writing these things. Is the first question is, what were your expectations going in? Right? Because like that is going to inform absolutely all the rest of it.
Mhm.
Then how did it all go down? Right? So that's like, include anything you wanted to, and that's your typical race report. Like when athletes typically write a race report, all they write is how it went down, right? Like, how did I feel? How did I pace? Who was where, whatever. Like that's the main thing. And so athletes like to write that part, but I think examining what were your expectations going in is important. Then, then I specifically ask, what things did you do well?
Mhm.
Because I want them to think about it. It's like, really think about, like, what did you do well? Oh, I did this well and I did that one. And that can change your perspective of a race. If in the end you're disappointed, if you can look back and be like, here are 3 things that I did really well that I wanted to do well. Then the fourth question is, if you could go back and do it again, what would you do differently?
I like
Right?
that one.
Which is a really good reflection too. And again, not everybody answers that. I mean, the best case scenario is like, I wouldn't do anything differently. I did it all, like I did everything. I trained the way I wanted to train. I stepped up to the challenge the way I wanted to. I fueled and paced correctly. Like that's dream scenario. It's rare, right? Like usually it's like, oh, here's the 17,000 things I, could have done differently. But if we pick those three, then that can inform how we are going forward.
Yeah, no, those are great. I hate to say this, but I don't always get the post race. I want everyone to write everything in Training Peaks. It's why we
Excellent.
have it. It's the
Same.
software. Don't send me an email. Don't send me a message. I don't want to, like, I want the details in Training Peaks so we can go back
Yeah,
to,
right. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, if you put it in Training Peaks, it lives there forever, right?
yeah,
Even if you're not with me coaching anymore, like you still have your Training Peaks account. So you can go back and read the words that you wrote about that race 3 years ago and remind yourself of the lessons that you learned. So like,
yeah.
yes, put it in Training Peaks. Like I delete emails, we text
Oh,
messages get deleted, instant messages get deleted. It lives in Training Peaks forever.
oh, exactly. And it's still a struggle. I don't know why, but but yeah, my go-to, we for most big A races, I have a pre-race call, and so I kind of know what their expectations were. Most of the time, people will tell me if they met their expectations or not, even if they're not telling me the how it went down. And I usually am, especially for Ironman, like what was your fueling? What was your did you hold the heart rates we discussed? Did you hold the power? Whatever it might, however we were executing the race. And then how were you feeling? And what did we do to problem solve when there were low points? And how did that work out? Blah, blah, blah. So I try to get them to write that down. I don't ask them what they think they want to do better for the next build, or what could they do differently. I think that's a really wise question to ask, and I'm going to probably start asking them to do it.
Take the question
So
and start
yeah,
asking it.
I think that's a great one. I usually, my data brain goes to like, okay, I'm problem solving for them, like what we're going to do. But there's a lot of wisdom within ourselves as athletes and how we executed. A lot of times there are things that maybe a coach won't identify that, lives in your mind, your brain, right? Like maybe you did give up on yourself, right? I mean, a lot of times that the data is not going to necessarily show that, right? Especially if you've got heart rate drift and you've got maybe some fueling issues, and unless an athlete really gets real with, yeah, I kind of just settled in and gave up and walked, jogged, walked, conversation, whatever it might have been. And that's an important component of improving for the next race. And for a lot of people, it's the build, like you said. I needed to set more time aside for XYZ. I think,
I could have
sorry,
slept more. That's a big one.
that's a big one.
Everything.
Fueling, sleeping more, recovery. My last, I think, point, or what I have noticed, and not just from this race, but really that the pros are developing into, like, I mean, these are well-rounded athletes. Like you very, like you said, so Patrick Lange, he had to be in the front pack of the swim, right? Like he knew that was his experience, his, if he was going to have a chance, he had to be in that front part of the swim. No longer are we really seeing someone that can swim 10 minutes behind or whatever deficit, right? And then still be able to bike very, very strongly, and then to be able to run. It's just not there anymore. And I think we're seeing that also on the women's side. So yeah, for age groupers, I think there's some wisdom. You can't let any one thing slide, I think. And you shouldn't, right? I think there's a dynamic of having the three components. I mean, they all kind of they can be detrimental to each other if we're overly focused on one or the other, but they really do add to this idea of being very well-rounded. So I don't know. I don't know. You've come from a swim background. I come from a run background. But I think that there's benefits, right, to getting in the pool, even if you don't want to. I think
Like
there's
a lot of benefits. Like I cannot, it was some athletes that it's like pulling teeth, making them get in the water because they're like, oh, and I understand the thought process there is like, oh, the swim is, half the time Ironman races are, downriver swims with a wetsuit and, it's going to be fast or whatever. So like, you don't have to put a lot of time in. And I understand that thinking. And at the same time, it's like, if you don't get to T2 with a bucket still full of energy,
Yeah. And
you're
that's,
gonna have a really long run, right? It's gonna be so much longer. And then what happens is they're like afterward, oh, I need to run more. I didn't have the run that I wanted, so I need to run more. I'm like, or you need to get to T2 with a bucket full of energy, right? Which means that the swim and the bike need to be less expensive than they were. And so there's a couple ways to make it less expensive. You can either train more so that your level is higher so that you can swim and bike at the pace that you want to go at without it being overly expensive. Or if you're not training that much on those sports, you have to slow down so that it's like within, because it's like it has to be at that point that is under your threshold. And the more we train, the higher our threshold gets. And so if you're not training that much and you have a low threshold, you have to stay below that. And when you go above that, those efforts are very expensive and it is like draining your bucket of energy for the run, and you will not access your run fitness. It does not matter how fit you are on the run if you show up to T2 without enough energy to execute on the fitness that you have.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and you hit the nail on the head there. In terms, we're not comparing the age group races necessarily to the pro races in terms of like being competitive again. Like you have to be a front swimmer, but it is about the energy expenditures. And if you're not getting in the pool, if you're missing the long rides, you're cutting things short. You're, and then you're blowing up, or you're not having the run you think you're capable of. And it's, I mean, all the time. Oh, my run isn't where I want it to be, so I got to run more. And
Same. I hear it all the time. I'm like, do you know? I mean, what we see too is some pros, and so I don't know how much. I would actually be curious to see how much you think this applies to age groupers too. But we have seen a pattern with the pro races that if and when a professional athlete gets injured and can't run as much as they want leading up to the race, like, and we've seen this not just this year, like Menno Coolhouse, he said he had an injury in the post-race press conference. He shared with everyone, I didn't run for like 4 weeks leading up to this race, and then he's fifth. And Tim O'Donnell, when
Mhm.
he got second, he was injured like the whole time. He was like water running. And but really what they do then is they spend all their energy swimming and biking. They get so swim and bike fit
Mhm.
that they get to T2, and even if they don't have all the miles in their legs in the last like 6 or 8 weeks, they have it from years past and
Right.
they can still call on it. And so then they go and they run this amazing marathon. And a lot of them at the end will be like, I really surprised myself. Like I don't know where that came from. I was not confident in my run, but I got to T2 and I'm like, let's just try and see. And then they execute the thing and they're like, wow, I felt so much better than I thought. And I'm like, that's because all that work that you did in the last decades
It's
but
cumulative.
show that, right? And so like while it does matter the training that you do, in the 6 or 8 weeks leading into the race, I mean, in theory, that's the most important training you do. But like part of me wants to argue it's really like the 10 years of um
It's cumulative for
yeah.
sure. And I think, we lose some of that neuromuscular activation, or the brain body, right, connection if we're not doing the thing. But that base level fitness we can still gain through swimming and biking, and sprinkling in run as we're able to, as we're recovering from the injury or what have you. And yeah, as long as we do have to believe in ourselves and in that process, and we have to call and we have to fuel and we have to understand our physiology and the conditions. But I think it's absolutely possible. I had an athlete years ago who had a high hamstring tendinopathy situation going on, lengthy recovery. He had not run. I think the longest run we did before one of the big Ironmans, this Ironman Boulder, back when they had Boulder, I want to say maybe 9 to 10 miles, maybe, but we were running very infrequently and very easy. And this happened to be a year where the conditions were horrendous. It was like 100 degrees on the course, massive carnage. He finished well above where he thought he would, and had a great race under the circumstances. On obviously, our plan was, very conservative, like very, very conservative, and through very conservative and trusting that he had the base fitness through a ton of biking and a ton of swimming and enough running to get him to the start line healthy. as healthy as he could be, you know, he was able to execute a great race for him. So yeah, absolutely. It's always, you know, people want to run more. And as a runner, I love running. It's a high risk sport. It's a high risk sport. And if we don't solve the other things with our races, it doesn't matter how much you run, how fast you run, you got to execute swim and bike first, you know, fuel physiology. And then we can talk about how we're going to execute the run and get them to where they, you know, feel like they want to be. But
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I have one final point here, and I don't know where the lesson is, but I just feel like if we're going to be talking about the men's Kona, it would be incomplete without mentioning this as a potential factor in the whole race. I have not heard other commentators talking about this, but I wonder if when more and more race reports start coming out, if we don't start to see a theme on this. And so it's something I'll be looking for when I'm like listening to what the pros have to say. So we've heard about some of them anyway, saying how they got stung by jellyfish
oh
when they
yeah,
first got in the water. I think the potential for that, first of all, jellyfish stings impact different people differently. So like some people are going to handle it a lot better than others. And so I'm actually really curious, like if Christian and Gustav got stung by jellies and their bodies were just like, what? Like, you know, and it really impacted them. I mean, it is like injecting a poison into your body. So my thinking, and so the other thing is this, and I was talking to one of my local athletes about this. So a couple of my local athletes were there volunteering, and you know they were in transition, they were at the finish, it was cool what they got to do. And they were saying really frustrated with Ironman for planning Kona on this weekend because it like those jellyfish were predictable. Like I looked at a jellyfish calendar, which we have
yep,
years in advance. And I remember last year looking at the calendar for jellyfish for something else. Like, cause I mean, I plan my athletes, their ocean swims around it. Like, oh, it's jellyfish weekend. So like we stay out of the ocean. We're not swimming because like that the risk is just too high. And I remember last year looking at the calendar and being like, October 26th, huh? Like that's interesting because that's the men's Ironman World Championships. Like, who is the race director? Why did they not plan, like, why did they plan the race on this weekend and not consult the jellyfish calendar, which is a known thing? So
yeah,
like, and what I was talking with one of my athletes about was that Ironman's in a bit of a pickle here because if they if they admit like any culpability, it's that they're admitting that like that was a planned thing. And like we knew that the possibility of jellyfish is really high this weekend. We could have had it last week and nobody would have gotten stung by a jellyfish because they just wouldn't have been in. It has to do with like the moon, the phases of the moon, and like in the dark phase of the moon is when the jellies come into shallow water. So, but if they don't admit that that's a thing that's predictable and all the local people know it, then it's like women who are going into Kona next year are going to be all freaked out. Like, what if we get hit by jellyfish? Blah, blah. And it's like, well, look, if you're outside that window, it's very unlikely to happen. And usually it's planned around that. So anyway, I just want to make like, if there's women that are listening to this that are afraid of jellyfish in Kona, know that like we can look at our calendar and predict if they're going to be there. Right. So like I haven't looked yet to see like the date of Kona for next year to see, but hopefully Ironman will take that into consideration. But anyway, in a big picture sense, I was thinking about this morning when I was walking. What happens when you get hit by a jellyfish sting or any sort of poison like that is your body's just going to be flooded with adrenaline, right?
mhm.
To like try to, I don't know if you've been stung by jellies, but like I've been stung by jellies a fair
I've
amount.
been stung by a Portuguese man of war in Kailua when I was doing my PhD in Hawaii. So I know, now I don't know if
And
the Portuguese man of war are the same. Do they come in?
it's different, but it's a similar like kind of physiology.
Oh,
And
it's
it's
painful.
really painful. But how you're, again, back to physiology, how your physiology is going to respond to that, you're going to be flooded with adrenaline, right? And so you can see how I'm thinking if we just take a step back and be like, what happens if you take 50 of the men's fittest people in the world, right? And you have them swim, like get stung by a bunch of jellyfish. So you insert a bunch of adrenaline into their systems, have them swim as hard as they can for 45 minutes, you know, because you're putting like hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line here, and then like get out onto the bike and your adrenaline is still just going to be pumping as your body's trying to like manage this poison that your body's been injected with from these jellyfish. And, so I wonder if that would have contributed some to so many guys over biking or like not being able to read their body signals very well because, their body's been flooded with adrenaline due to the jellyfish stings. And then at some point that adrenaline wears off, right? Like we can run on adrenaline for a long time, but not forever. And so you're wondering if it like, by mile 10, so it's like part of it might have just been regular physiology and lack of carbohydrates and glycogen runs out and blah, blah, blah. I think special in this race that the jellyfish
Could
very
be.
well could have played a really big role in like just a surge of adrenaline, which caused everybody to just blow it out for the first 3 or 4 hours. And then it comes
Yeah.
back and you're like, the adrenaline, your body's like, oh, now I'm tired, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. No, yeah, those yeah, I shouldn't say that. Maybe not surprising that they maybe didn't check the well-known calendar. I mean, I don't know. I
If you
shouldn't say
weren't local, you might not know, but you would think they would have somebody local like on their staff, like someone who would have looked at that. I will
that.
say every single race director on Oahu looks at the jellyfish calendar. Like I'm involved in some of those like local race plannings. And like the first thing we do is get out the jellyfish calendar and be like, okay, we're not swimming that weekend or that weekend or that weekend.
Right.
Really
Yeah.
obvious. Okay.
Well,
So,
hopefully
this was a
they'll,
really fun conversation. Thank you for having it with me.
yeah, no,
And
great, Michelle. Yeah. I'd be happy to do it any other time on other topics. So
we will do that. So let me see if I can figure out how to stop recording here.